Good day, Ma'am Jocelyn Ubas. My name is Paul Ryan Cabaluna Panilag. I live in Kabantian Country Homes, Buhangin, Davao City. The subject is mathematics in the modern world, and my topic is flows with voting system. Stanford economist Ken Arrow received the Nobel Prize in 1972 for proving in 1951 that there is no such thing as a perfect voting system. This means that for any system, one can come up with an example that makes that system look bad. The question, therefore, is not whether one can come up with an example, but rather how realistic that example is. A second question is whether one has any real example of absurd outcomes instead of invented ones. And this is the example of flows with voting system. Plurality voting, approval voting, pairwise Condorcet voting, instant runoff voting, board account point system for a first choice, and 3 for a second, and so on. This is the first example of flows with voting system. Plurality. Plurality voting has a flow that occurs frequently when a small numbers of people vote for a third-party candidate. They can swing a close race to the major party candidate opposed by a majority of voters. This happened in the 2000 presidential with Democratic candidate Al Gore and Green Party candidate Ralph Nader, both in the state of Florida and nationally. It also occurred in the state of Mexico in Iowa, where a Pat Buchanan supporter swung that state to Gore in a U.S. Senate and a state Senate race in Washington state, where libertarian candidates swung the race to Democrats, which in the giving Democrats control of both the state Senate and the U.S. Senate after Jim Jeffords' defection from the Republican Party. And the second example, approval voting. In approval voting, voters can vote for or approve of as many candidates as they like, and the candidate with the most votes wins the election. Example scenario, percent of candidate with grade, electorate in order of preference. Group 1, 40% Jones A, White C plus, Smith C minus. Group 2, 35% Smith A plus, Jones C. White F. Group 3, 25% White A, Smith B plus, Jones F. Under a two-round or instant runoff, no one has a majority after the first round, so White is eliminated. Her supporters prefer Smith, and Smith elected 60% to 40%. This makes sense. White had little enthusiastic support, and when the race went to Jones versus Smith, most of the voters preferred Smith. But what happens under approval voting? If each the factions does not bullet vote, but rather approves of their top two choices, Jones gets 75% of the vote, White gets 65% of the vote, and Smith gets only 60% of the vote. Even though most voters prefer Smith to Jones, Jones wins. Well, when the uproar dies down, what does Smith do in the next election? He asks these voters to bullet vote. Of course, after all, if his enthusiastic supporters had simply bullet voted the first time, he would have had a better chance of winning his voter cause Jones to win. Obviously, if only Smith voters bullet both vote and everyone else votes the same way in the second election. As in the first, White will win. This will cause Jones to also tell her supporters to bullet vote either when she gets wind of Smith's strategy or in the third election. Those we see that sort things contagious as anyone who has been around politics as opposed to academia knows. And before long, everyone asked their supporters to bullet vote, causing approval voting to degenerate into simple plurality didn't happen in the first election. It would happen in the second and subsequent election. The third example of close with voting system, pairwise Condorcet voting. In the above example, there is no pairwise winner. Smith defeat Jones 60%, 40%. Jones defeat White 75% to 25%. White defeats Smith 65% and 35%. So in this situation, you have to use another method to eliminate one of the candidates to determine the winner. In addition to the flaws revealed by specific example, approval and Condorcet voting suffer from another real-world problem. They encourage candidates to avoid taking public stand on controversial issues. Since the least offensive candidate can emerge victorious, those compared to instant runoff voting, they create a less well-informed electorate. And this is a fourth example of closed with voting system. Instant runoff voting. A commonly cited example is one in which two extreme candidates have strong core support. Neither can appeal to a majority, and a compromise candidate has weak core support, but is preferred by a majority over the other two candidates. For example, candidates support Jones 45% and Marvin moderate 15% and Smith 40%. If the supporters of the extreme candidates prefer the moderate to other extremists, then the moderate candidate would win head-to-head races against both of the other candidates. In an instant runoff or a two-round runoff, with this example, the compromise candidate is eliminated and one of the extremists is elected. As an astute visitor pointed out, instant runoff voting generally does a better job of finding the true compromise candidate than either plurality or two-round runoff election. The last example of flows with voting system. Board account. Board account. In an election with candidates using a board account, a candidate received in -1 points for each first choice and -2 for each second choice, and so on. The candidate with the most points win the election. The chief flow in this system is that your vote for your second choice can end up defeating first choice. And this is the end of my report in flows with voting system. And thank you and God bless.